Today what I thought I would do is give you a little taste of some of the work that we've done on the experience of awe and how it shapes social relations, how people relate to one another, altruism, kindness, generosity, and compassion. Now, before I begin, let me start off by asking you a question. When is the last time you watched tiny little droplets of colored water collide with a bowl of milk? Okay, well, just in case it's been a while, here you go. Here's a video. It is being played 200 times slower than real time. Now, unlike the vast granite canyons of Yosemite and Kings Canyon, this is the universal laws unfolding at a level rarely perceptible to the naked eye. And it's probably not surprising that people like yourselves might find this beautiful, perhaps breathtaking, mesmerizing, maybe even awe-inspiring, but might it surprise you if I were to say that having spent just a few fleeting moments taking in these images might have actually just made you a tiny bit kinder to one another? Well, I'm a social psychologist, and I'm really interested in people, so it's good that I'm facing you and you're facing me. As a social psychologist, I study what people do around others. And in particular, what are the psychological processes that kind of shift a person's attention away from that me, that kind of constant buzzing and preoccupation with your own self, with your own goals, with your own desires that seem to pervade our everyday lives? What shifts a person's attention away from those things toward the needs of others, the interests of others, one's broader social collective, and the greater good? And it's that general question that got me interested in the topic of awe, which, whether it arises due to experiences that one can have in religion, in spirituality, in science, in art, in contemplation, as Jason was talking about earlier, of our place in this ever-expanding universe, or due to experiences that we have in the natural world, in the natural environment, it's clear that awe results in a sudden and dramatic reduction in attention to the self and its goals, and causes people to lose themselves in this all-encompassing event, to kind of be here now. Awe seems to kind of dissolve the self, if you will, to give rise to this feeling that the self has been lost, and perhaps allows the world in its novelty and freshness to kind of seep in. William James, who's perhaps the founder of modern psychology, described awe as a kind of immense elation and freedom that allowed the outlines of confining selfhood melt down. Confining selfhood. Speaking to this idea, maybe, that awe gives rise to a feeling that the self, or a preoccupation with the self, kind of dissolves and perhaps triggers an increased orientation to the world around you, an increased connection to others, their needs, their concerns, beyond the concerns of mere self-interest. All right, so here's some of the science. Wanting to get some initial insight on this question, we ran a study of 1,500 participants all over this country, a bunch of adults that we recruited from a nationally representative sample, so these are people all over, and we had them play a simple economic decision-making task, where we gave each person in the study lottery tickets that we said would get used in their name for a prize drawing, a $500 prize drawing that would be run at the end of the study. So they get these lottery tickets, and they're going to be used in their name at the end of the study for this $500 cash prize. But we tell participants that they've been paired with another person in the study, who they'll never know and who'll never meet them, so it's totally anonymous, and that person has not, we are telling the person, has not gotten any lottery tickets. And we ask our participants whether they would be willing to give any of their lottery tickets to this other person who otherwise would have none. And that's our measure in this study of generosity. Okay. We also measure a number of other things, including the extent to which people reported feeling in their daily lives a number of different emotions. So the extent to which they feel things in their everyday practice as they go around in their social interactions, things like pride, love, compassion, and also critically awe. And what we found was that people who reported feeling more awe in their daily lives behaved significantly more generously, I should say, to this other person. They gave away far more lottery tickets relative to their more, I would say, awe-deprived counterparts. Okay. So, tentative evidence, if you will, that maybe the experience of awe is associated with increased generous behavior toward other people. But what about causality? Might awe, the experience of awe, even ones induced in the lab, even on a fleeting basis, when you put on a test tube and have people experience or take a psychological drink from that test tube, might that cause people to behave in more generous, more kind, and more compassionate ways? And so we've been interested in testing its causal effects in a number of different experiments where we momentarily induce in participants, like Lonnie Sciotta spoke about earlier, experimentally induce in them momentarily these experiences of awe and see what it does to how they relate to one another. Okay, a lot of different ways that you can do this. A simple way is using this simple autobiographical recall method. We just ask people to reflect on a time when they experienced awe in the past. And by getting people to kind of recall this past awe event, you can kind of get them to put themselves in what they were feeling and how they were thinking about things in that experience, and you can temporarily bring about more feelings of awe in the here and now. Beyond asking people to kind of reflect on an experience, you can also induce awe in the situation, using things like awe-inspiring stimuli, so videos of planet Earth, videos of this planet's natural wonders, even more fearful stimuli, so things like videos of hurricanes, natural disasters, earthquakes, volcanoes, things that have a little bit of fear in them can also bring about experiences of awe. I don't think I'm surprising you here. And beyond things physically large or immense in scope, even stimuli on a minute scale like those droplets that I began today's talk with can inspire and arouse these momentary experiences of awe. Across these different and very varied elicitations of awe, one of the things that we're really interested in is what awe does to the mind. And in particular, what does it do to a person's sense of themselves? And what we've been documenting, and this is in collaboration with Dacker and Lonnie and a number of other people, is that awe gives rise to the sense that we call a small self. It temporarily shifts a person's attention away from themselves to the larger things that they're a part of, momentarily reminding a person of the larger things they're connected to, and that in the grand scheme of things, their interests, their needs, their goals are somewhat less significant. So you can measure this using different statements like, I feel the presence of something greater than myself. In the grand scheme of things, my own issues and concerns do not matter as much. I feel like I'm a part of a greater whole. Again, no matter how you bring about this experience of awe, there in the orange bar, you see that relative to all sorts of different comparison emotions, all sorts of different control positive emotions, these experiences of awe make people feel relatively less significant and more connected to something bigger, larger, more powerful than their individual self. And similarly, across these varied manipulations, we also find that awe brings about significant boosts in a person's generosity, their willingness to help others, their willingness to behave in more ethical ways and take on the needs of others and deprioritize their own individual goals and concerns. And awe seems to give rise to these increased patterns of generosity and compassion and kindness because of this relative sense of smallness that awe can bring about. Now, beyond the walls of our lab, we've been interested in awe in situ. What awe might do in naturalistic settings. And Craig Craig Anderson, in his talk, was talking about some really remarkable work that's being done in this arena. But a great many naturalists and poets and artists and authors have talked about the tremendous and very striking experiences of awe that a person can have in nature. John Steinbeck, in one of my favorite books, Travels with Charlie, talked about the silence and awe, the non-transferable silence and awe that can come about when confronted with the massive giant redwoods of the California coast. Now, on the UC Berkeley campus, we don't have giant redwood trees. But as many of you know, we do have the tallest and oldest stand of blue gum, you didn't necessarily know that, but hardwood eucalyptus trees in all of North America. So it's the tallest and oldest stand of eucalyptus trees located not too far from us, just 3 minutes down the path. And in one experiment that we ran, we wanted to see whether even fleeting experiences of awe amidst these towering trees, a fleeting experience of awe amidst these towering trees might cause people to be more helping and more generous to someone else. All right, so here's how we did it. That stick figure represents what may have been a participant in the study. We didn't actually test stick figures, though that would have been interesting. So here we led our participants down the path and had them spend either 60 seconds looking up at these towering trees. These were a timed 60-second experience. Or with their back to the trees, looking up at a similarly tall but less awe-inspiring big building. Now, after 60 seconds had elapsed, they were approached by our experimenter in the study who gave them a questionnaire to complete with measures that we were interested in, but in the process of doing so, ostensibly by accident, tripped over themselves and dropped a box of pens on the ground. Now, this was actually a staged accident, something we'd rehearsed with our experimenters time and again to make sure they got it right, but we've set this up to test the extent to which participants are now going to be willing to bend down, pick up pens to help out this other person that they have otherwise no relationship to. Mm-hmm. So that's our measure of helping behavior. How many pens participants in this study bent down and picked up? All right, we measured a few other things, like how entitled people felt. This is a standard scale. My favorite item on it is if I were on the Titanic, I would deserve to be on the first. I like that it says the first lifeboat. Now, the 8th or 9th wouldn't be the same, but it's that first lifeboat and getting ahead of the pack that really matters. We measured also how much people wanted to be paid for their participation in the experiment, and among other things, their willingness to behave in ethical or unethical ways. For instance, whether or not they would be willing to keep change given to them accidentally at a coffee shop. Okay. So, participants who spent just 60 seconds, again, just 60 seconds looking up at those big trees, picked up significantly more pens, helping out this other person than did participants who were also looking up, but at that less awe-inspiring big building. They reported reduced entitlement, so they felt less deserving of things relative to others. They wanted to be paid less for their participation in the study, so maybe awe attenuates materialistic desires, and they made more ethical decisions. In broad fashion, even fleeting experiences of awe seem to situate a person in a broader collective and motivate a person to take on the concerns of others and behave on their behalf. Now, across these studies and a lot of other work that is ongoing, we're finding that awe seems to connect us to things larger than ourselves, reminding us of how our individual concerns are perhaps less significant in the grand scheme of things, connecting us to our groups and collectives and motivating us to care for others and the collective good. And I think that's a particularly important point now when we are situated in what many psychologists have referred to as a narcissism epidemic. In fact, in this country over the last 40 or 50 years, people have become, and this is well documented by sociologists and psychologists, people have become more and more individualistic, more entitled, more disconnected from others, their communities, and the world around them, and more focused on themselves. In our own work, we find that these patterns are actually in part rooted in economic inequality and the social distance that economic inequality seems to give rise to. In fact, it's among those at the top, those who are the most well off, who are better off than others, who psychologically seem to translate that experience of being better off than others to feeling better than others, documenting more entitlement and more deservingness among those who are privileged and powerful. And that inflated sense of the self, in fact, attenuates their prosocial and altruistic tendencies. We find across a number of different studies that it's the wealthier individuals in our studies who are less generous, less compassionate, and less altruistic than their less well-off, less privileged counterparts. But if that's the case, then maybe the relative smallness that awe brings about might actually cause those who are better off to be just as prosocial and just as kind and generous. And that's exactly what we find across a number of different experiments. Even fleeting experiences of awe can serve as a nudge, a little reminder to even the most privileged and the powerful in society, reminding them of the larger things that they're a part of, connecting them to others, and motivating them to care for the needs of others and the interests of the greater good. To conclude, as inequality runs rampant, and our country, it seems, grows ever more divided, we can't help but wonder how to curb these mounting levels of narcissism, of entitlement, and self-interest. And as we work to reverse these long-term socioeconomic and socio-political trends, to foster more connections to others, stronger communities, and more prosociality and more kindness. In the short term, it would also make sense to foster more experiences of awe for ourselves and for others. I don't mean to suggest that awe is some sort of panacea, not at all, but it might, at least in part, serve as a shortcut to the kinds of psychological shifts that we're hoping to bring about. It's important to seek out those experiences of awe, to attune to them, and cherish and protect those things that bring them about, because I'm convinced, as I think we all are, that we'll all be better off for it. Thank you.